At 01:19:29 minutes and 29 seconds my T, the sky swallowed 239 futures, yet the sea still refuses to confess what it heard next. I've replayed that moment so many times my ears ring with the same phantom static. The ACAR's handshake ping arrives like a single heartbeat, sharp, digital, and then nothing. Just a pulse in the dark, followed by the slow exhale of an entire world about to vanish. I let the silence sit with you for a moment, because silence is the only honest witness we have. No radar, no cockpit recorder, no floating seat cushion can tell us what the pilots felt when the last transponder squawk died. But metadata can. Ghostly packets of data, stitched together by satellites that never blink. I'm not here to guess who turned what knob. I'm here to let the ghosts speak. So we begin with the final sign-off. Good night, Malaysian 370. The first time it's crisp, almost warm, like a lullaby to the tower. The second time it stretches, syllables thinning, vowels yawning open until the words sound underwater. The third time it's barely a gasp of static, a confession stretched across 23,000 feet of emptiness. I want you to imagine that voice as the last human sound those 239 souls ever heard. Not screaming, not praying, just a polite farewell, looping into distortion like a record left too long in the sun. Makes you wonder what politeness costs us in the end. Now, the screen, if you could see it, goes black. Not the black of sleep, but the black of deletion. No stars, no horizon, no moon. Just the absence of everything we use to know where we are. And in that void, the metadata starts to crawl. 1 kilobyte at a time, slower than breath. Each packet is a fingerprint. Fuel flow, engine vibration, cabin pressure delta. They float past like plankton, glowing green in the dark, and I catch them with gloved hands I'll never really feel. Somebody always asks if the pilots knew. I dodge that question like a storm cell. Instead, I listen for the moment the autopilot whispered goodbye. It happens at 01:21 13 seconds my T. A subtle drop in the bus voltage, the digital equivalent of a shrug. After that, the plane was no longer flying toward Beijing. It was simply flying away. You ever try to outrun your own shadow at 550 knots? Doesn't end well. I count heartbeats now, not mine, yours. I know you're leaning in, earbuds snug, maybe a little cold. That's the metadata I care about. Your pulse quickens each time the cockpit voice grows fainter. That's how I know the story's working. True crime isn't about bodies. It's about the moment curiosity becomes complicity. At 01:22:28 my T, the transponder stops replying. Not a dramatic explosion, just a flat line. Imagine a cardiogram taped to the fridge door, the last proud scribble of a life that suddenly refuses to scribble anymore. That's the sound the sky made. One digital heartbeat, then none. The radar blips dissolve like sugar in rain, and the controllers lean back, frowning at empty scopes, already rehearsing the sentences they'll say tomorrow morning. I leave you there, suspended between the last good night and the first forever silence, because what comes next isn't speculation. It's the slow-motion autopsy of absence. 46 minutes and 31 seconds remain unaccounted for, and every one of them is darker than this one. So breathe in, hold it, and when you're ready, follow me past the point where the machine stopped talking and the ocean started listening. It's already listening to you. The silence after the last good night isn't empty. It's crowded with ghosts made of ones and zeros. I'm staring at a screen filled with hexadecimal, each pair of characters pulsing like a dying heartbeat. 017890. That's not a number. It's the last time the plane told the truth. And I'm about to tear it apart, bite by bite, until it confesses what it never got to say. You have to understand, ACARS doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in handshakes. Every 20 seconds, like a child checking if its mother is still holding its hand, the aircraft reaches up to space and whispers, "I'm still here, still here, still here, still here." The satellite never answers back. It just listens, records, forgets. But tonight, the forgetting starts early. At 01:21 and 4 seconds, the first packet arrives. I can see it, raw and naked. stripped of every comforting lie we tell ourselves about technology. The header begins with 85, Protocol Identifier. Then comes the aircraft registration, 9MMRO. I say it out loud like a prayer. 9 Mike Mike Romeo Oscar. That's her name. That's who she was before she became a ghost. The waveform starts as a gentle sign, almost beautiful, like breathing. I overlay it onto satellite imagery of the South China Sea, black water under a blacker sky, and suddenly this perfect mathematical curve becomes obscene. Because I know what comes next. I know where this curve ends. 20 seconds later, another handshake. This one's stronger. Signal strength -62 decibel milliwatts, which is actually pretty good for being 40,000 feet above nowhere. The metadata shows cabin pressure stable, engine performance nominal, autopilot engaged. Everything normal. Normal. The most dangerous word in aviation. I'm watching the timestamps now like a countdown to execution. 012124, 012144. Each one a small mercy, a tiny resurrection. The aircraft's asking permission to keep existing, and for now, the sky is saying yes. But something's wrong. I can taste it, metallic, like blood in the mouth. The packets are getting shorter. Not the data itself, but the space between transmission and acknowledgement. It's subtle, half a second here, 3/4 there, like someone hesitating before lying. The third handshake comes at 012104. This one carries extra weight, literally. The fuel calculation algorithm reports remaining endurance of 7 hours, 12 minutes. That's how much longer she could have flown. That's how much longer she didn't. I'm building the waveform now, stacking each packet like vertebrae in a spine. When I play them back as audio, don't ask why I did this, I just had to know. They sound like whale song, long, mournful pulses separated by aching silence. And somewhere in that silence, between the second and third notes, I swear I can hear metal screaming. The fourth handshake should have arrived at 012113. I have the timestamp circled in red, a small circle of accusation on my screen. But the satellite logs show nothing. Not weak signal, not corrupted data. Just absence. A negative space where 800,000 pounds of aluminum and souls should have been. This is the moment everything changes. Not the crash, not the dive. This first digital absence that will widen into an abyss deep enough to swallow every theory, every hope, every mother's prayer. Clears throat. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's pregnant with possibility, and all of them are monstrous. I keep staring at that empty timestamp, willing it to populate with data. 012113. The numbers feel heavier now, like they're made of lead, because I know what's coming next. Every 20-second interval after this one will be another small death, another permission denied, until the sky finally stops asking and the ocean starts answering. But here's what really keeps me awake. Somewhere in the next 46 minutes and 31 seconds, the plane will try to speak again. Just once. Just enough to make us wish it hadn't. The waveform flatlines. The cursor blinks. And somewhere in the darkness above the Indian Ocean, 800,000 pounds of aluminum begins its long fall into forever. Ready to hear what it said with its last breath? The waveform flatlines. The cursor blinks. And somewhere in the darkness above the Indian Ocean, 800,000 pounds of aluminum begins its long fall into forever. Ready to hear what it said with its last breath? I'm not sure any of us are. I spent 3 weeks in a Kuala Lumpur data center, surrounded by the digital ghosts of 239 lives. The carrier had finally released the voicemail fragments, 7-second shards of human connection, each one stamped with coordinates that no longer existed. Picture it, a mother's voice traveling through towers that were already underwater, a lover's promise bouncing off satellites that had long since turned away. The first fragment belonged to Seat 23C, Sarah Chen, 29, pharmaceutical rep. Her voice cracked through the speakers like breaking glass. "Mom, the clouds look like your garden. The roses are..." That's where it cut off. But here's what froze my blood. The timestamp showed she'd left this message 8 minutes after the transponder went dark. 8 minutes of normalcy while the plane was already veering toward oblivion. I queued up the next one. Marcus Webb, 45, investment banker. His voice carried that particular exhaustion of someone who'd made peace with disappointing people. Lisa, look, the merger's not happening. I need you to know that Even facing eternity, he couldn't finish that apology. The coordinates tagged his one to a cell tower that was already 200 miles behind them. Physics and mercy both failing simultaneously, but it was the third message that made me stop breathing. A child's voice, maybe 6 years old, singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in Mandarin. The waveform showed her mother humming along in the background, both of them unaware that they were already ghosts in training. The timestamp read 0121, precisely when air traffic control lost them. They were singing to satellites that would never answer back. I started mapping them, each voicemail a star in a constellation of last moments. The stockbroker's confession orbiting the graduates whispered, "I love you," to someone named David. The flight attendant's quick prayer circling a grandmother's recipe for dumplings, never to be cooked again. They formed this impossible galaxy of mundane humanity, suspended forever at the moment when mundane became unthinkable. 43 messages in, something changed. The fragments started overlapping, 2 voices speaking simultaneously, then 3, then 7. It sounded like a choir of the damned until I realized they weren't overlapping, they were echoing, the same 7-second loop, playing forward and backward, creating this horrible mirror of human connection. That's when I found it. Message 62, seat 7F, timestamp 0121 and 43 seconds. A woman's voice, calm, almost serene. The captain says we'll be landing soon. I can see But here's the thing. At the 4-second mark, underneath her words, there's something else. Not another passenger, not background noise. It's the cabin PA system. But here's what keeps me from sleeping. That PA fragment, it lasts exactly half a second, just enough for 3 syllables. I've run it through every audio enhancement program known to man, and what I hear makes my bones feel hollow. Because those 3 syllables, they're not in English. They're not in any language that should exist on that plane. It's the sound of metal recognizing its own death, the groan of aluminum understanding that it's about to become a tomb. And the worst part? I think it's still broadcasting. Somewhere in the Indian Ocean, there's a black box playing that half-second of impossible sound on infinite loop, waiting for someone to understand what it means. The cursor blinks. The next chapter begins with coordinates that shouldn't exist, where the ocean is deeper than language itself. Ready to dive? Coordinates that shouldn't exist, where the ocean is deeper than language itself. Ready to dive? Then let's step backward, just a little, to the moment when nobody on the ground knew they were diving at all. Because before the plunge, before the groan, before that half-second of impossible sound, there was only the ordinary, and ordinary is the scariest thing of all. 17 minutes past 1 in the morning, Ho Chi Minh time. The sky over Vietnam is a quiet bruise, purple and swollen with monsoon air. Inside the control room, the overhead fluorescents hum like bored bees, and the radar sweep, tick, paints the world in slow, green circles. Each tick is a handshake, a promise, a digital whisper between airplane and earth. I'm still here. I'm still breathing. On screen, every aircraft is a neat little tag. Call sign, altitude, speed. Little obedient ghosts marching west across the South China Sea. Except one ghost is late. Flight 370 last spoke to Lumpur Control at 1:19 and 29 seconds. The controller's voice had been crisp, almost bored. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9, good night. And the pilot, calm, steady, answered, good night, Malaysian 370. That was it. No drama, no static, no mayday. Just a polite farewell, like hanging up on your mother. The frequency clicked over to Vietnam, and the world waited for the next hello. It never came. Here in the tower, Second Lieutenant Lin is watching the sweep. Tick. The radar refreshes every 4.7 seconds. Tick. Her eyes flick from the clock, 1:22, to the screen. The MH370 label should appear any moment, sliding into her sector like a well-trained dog. Tick. Nothing. Tick. You ever stare at a kettle waiting for it to whistle? Multiply that by every parent who's ever waited for a kid to come home. That's what Lynn is feeling, except the kettle is the size of a Boeing 777 and the whistle might be a crash. She reaches for the landline, knuckles whitening. Lumpur. This is Ho Chi Minh. We show Malaysian 370 negative check-in. Confirm last position? Static. Not angry static, just empty, polite static, like a receptionist saying the person you're looking for stepped away. The metronome keeps ticking. Tick. 4.7 seconds. Tick. The gap stretches from 2 minutes to 3 to 5. Controllers trade glances. Someone's coffee goes cold. 18 minutes. That's how long it takes for paperwork to become panic. 18 ticks of a metronome that sounds, suddenly, like a death watch. Lynn keys the mic again, voice still professional, but the edges are fraying. Malaysian 370. Ho Chi Minh. Radio check. How do you read? Silence answers. Not dead air, worse. The channel is open, the circuit hot, but no one is home. It's the sound of a phone ringing in an abandoned house. Then, something else. A crackle. Not voice, not words, just presence. Like someone breathing into the mic without realizing it's live. The faintest brush of wind, maybe a seatbelt buckle clinking, maybe nothing. The hair on Lynn's neck rises. She leans closer, headphone cup tight against her ear. She mouths, knowing no one will answer. The static swells, washes over her like warm water, then cuts off. Dead cold. The clock reads 1:37. The gap is now 18 minutes wide and widening every second. The shift supervisor has been called. Phones are ringing in Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and Langley, Virginia. But right now, in this room, there is only the metronome, the green sweep, and the terrible suspicion that the sky has swallowed something enormous. Lynn sits back. Her reflection stares at her from the black glass of the radar scope. Two small, terrified eyes without a mouth. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of every map, 300 people are still waiting for the handoff that never came. And I swear, listeners, if you put your own headphones on right now and tune to 120.9 megahertz, you might still hear it, the faintest echo of that open mic breath, circling the globe like a ghost that hasn't been told it's dead. Next chapter, we follow that breath. We follow it past the edge of radar, past the last known point, into the place where satellites blink and the ocean forgets its own name. Ready to lose the signal completely? Then stay tuned. So we followed that breath, past the squawk codes and the flight strips and the polite bureaucratic silence of air traffic control, past the point where radar waves just shrug and give up. And when the last echo died, I opened a black screen simulation older than half the investigators still looking for this plane. No graphics, no fancy cockpit mock-up, just a cursor blinking like a heartbeat that forgot its own rhythm. The first thing it asked for was fuel. Not romance, not conspiracy, just cold kilograms of Jet A. I typed in the numbers the Malaysians swore were loaded at Kuala Lumpur. 49,200 kilos, give or take the spill on the tarmac. The screen stayed black. Then, a single ring appeared, pale green, expanding outward, as if someone had thrown a stone into the sky itself. The ring was labeled with a 98% probability, meaning if nothing went wrong, nothing went right. The aircraft would still be somewhere inside that glowing halo. I hit enter again. The software sighed, or maybe that was me. The ring widened, thinned, and the percentage dropped to 95, then 90. Each expansion took exactly 8 seconds. 8 seconds the passengers never felt because they were already somewhere else in their minds. Maybe watching the seatback map, maybe dozing, maybe texting someone they'd never see again. With every new ring, the color cooled from green to cyan to Arctic blue. By the time we reached the 7th ripple, the percentage had fallen to 63. The southern arc now stretched like a lazy smile across the emptiest slice of the Indian Ocean. I remember leaning closer, as if proximity could coax more truth from dead pixels. Come on, show me where you went. Then the algorithm did something nobody programmed it to do. The rings stopped obeying the expected glide ratio. They started folding back on themselves, overlapping like petals of a flower nobody planted. The eighth ring pulsed violet, 42%. The ninth, indigo, 28. I felt my throat dry. The cursor blinked faster, impatient. I double-checked the fuel flow constants, the temperature at flight level 350, the bleed air taps for the packs, everything textbook. Yet the pedals kept curling inward, tighter, darker. That's when the percentages started speaking in decimals. 12.7, 6.1, 2.4. Each drop was a confession that we knew less and less about metal and wind and human intention. I found myself whispering coordinates aloud, nonsense syllables that still tasted like hope. Minus 35.8 south, 93.8 east. Minus 36 south, 94 east. The cursor kept marching south, south, until the latitude read minus 39, and the screen went black again. For 3 heartbeats, nothing. Then a final ring bloomed, smaller than all the rest, the color of burned-out stars. 0.03%. The annotation beside it wasn't even a probability anymore. It was a question mark wearing a crown of thorns. The coordinate it settled on? 44.4 south, 111.2 east, a spot 500 meters beneath the Diamantini Trench, deeper than any search sub has ever dared. The software labeled it simply Terminus. I stared at that word until the letters stopped looking like letters. Terminus. End of the line, end of the rings, end of everything we thought we could calculate. I could almost hear the engines cough, flame out, gulp cold seawater. And in that imagined silence, the black screen offered one last gift. A single blinking caret inviting me to type something, anything. So I typed, why? The cursor blinked once, twice, then printed a response I swear wasn't in the code. Because the ocean keeps secrets better than satellites ever could. And just like that, the simulation crashed back to DOS, leaving only the low hum of my hard drive and the feeling that somewhere beneath 500 meters of black water, a ripple is still expanding, unseen, unmeasured, waiting for us to follow it even deeper. But before we descend, listeners, let me ask you this. If the plane truly ended at Terminus, why did the Inmarsat handshake, 8 minutes after the final ring, pulse again, stronger than before? Stay tuned, because Chapter 6 begins where the trench gives up and the signal starts breathing all over again. Ooh. 8 minutes after that phantom pulse, the ACARS box coughed up one last bite of blood. I was hunched over my desk, headphones clamped like a vice, when the 7th partial engine report scrolled across the screen. Cabin altitude had spiked, 31,000 feet to 42,000 in under 8 seconds. That's not a climb. That's an explosion you don't hear. I played the numbers back at 1/10 speed, letting each millisecond stretch until it snapped. The plane had shrugged off its own atmosphere, and every living lung inside became a balloon looking for a needle. I imagined the masks tumbling, yellow cups on elastic leashes, brushing cheeks already turning blue. No screams made it into the metadata, just a soft hiss as the outflow valves surrendered to the void. I leaned closer to the speaker, as if the hiss could tell me who was still breathing. The next packet arrived 97 seconds later. Fuel flow, engine temps, thrust, everything normal except for the altitude field. Now reading. Dashboard that refuses to confess. I pictured the cockpit. 2 pilots, 4 shoulders, 8 hands, all of them suddenly weightless. Did they reach for the masks first or for each other? Maybe both, maybe neither. The black box won't say. The black box is still 3 miles down, flirting with manganese nodules. I cross-referenced the pressure drop against the last known waypoint. The math says they were already south of the corridor, gliding on a ghost airway that exists only in satellite ephemeris. That's when I felt it, my own ears popping, even though the room pressure was fine. The body remembers trauma it never lived. I ran the oxygen duration tables. 15 minutes per mask, give or take the will to keep breathing. After that, silence becomes the loudest passenger. And still, the engines kept whispering to the satellite every hour. Polite little handshakes from a plane that no longer had a voice. The 6th handshake had been textbook. 44 milliseconds round trip. Clean, human. The 7th, 40 milliseconds too late. In satellite geometry, that's an extra 1,200 kilometers of distance, or a scream bouncing off the ocean floor before climbing back to space. I looped the packet, in Audacity, stretched the waveform until it resembled a whale song played at the wrong speed. Somewhere inside that 40 millisecond echo, I swear I heard a seatbelt buckle hit the ceiling. Then nothing. Just the rhythmic ping of metal cooling in abyssal darkness. I checked the clock, 0119 UTC, the same minute the Malaysian controller had yawned and looked away. Coincidence? The universe loves a dramatic beat. Here's the part that keeps me awake. The engines were healthy, the fuel still flowing, yet the cabin altitude insisted on infinity. That means someone, or something, opened the outflow valves wide and never closed them. Not a rupture, not a bomb, a choice. I backed the simulation up to the moment of decompression and let it play forward again. This time, I muted every sound except the oxygen generator's chemical hiss. It's softer than you'd think, like rain on a tin roof 2 houses away. One by one, the masks stop whispering as their 15 minutes expire. The last one flutters like a jellyfish losing its pulse. Then the 7th handshake arrives, 40 milliseconds late, carrying nothing but the memory of lungs that are no longer there. And that, listeners, is where my software crashes again, dumping me to a black screen that reflects my own wide pupils. But the story's not done, because 8 minutes after that tardy ping, the satellite logged an 8th handshake, stronger, steadier, and here's the twist, arriving 30 milliseconds early. Something, or someone, was still answering, something closer to the surface than physics should allow. So tell me, if the plane was already a tomb, who just knocked from the inside? So tell me, if the plane was already a tomb, who just knocked from the inside? Lear's throat. I left that question hanging like a bad connection, and it followed me down the corridor to a room that smelled of salt, wet plastic, and old coffee. The oceanographers had been awake for 36 hours straight, eyes glowing from monitors that showed nothing but looping currents and drifting ghosts. They call it reverse drift, winding the ocean backwards frame by frame, until every piece of debris swims home like a salmon that forgot it's dead. I watched them feed the flaperon into the model first. The severed wing piece spun lazily counterclockwise, tracing a pale ribbon across the Indian Ocean until it shrank to a pinprick south of 35 degrees. Then came seat cushions, each one a pastel rectangle with bite marks from sharks or time. They converged faster, as though the foam remembered where it had been thrown. A life jacket bloomed orange in the simulation, its whistle still tethered by a frayed cord. I swear it paused, right before it snapped into the ellipse, like it wanted to wave goodbye. The software labeled that moment July 12, 2015, 812 days after the sky first swallowed 370. One of the scientists, call her Mara because that's not her name, leaned so close her breath fogged the screen. She whispered, "They're not just pieces, they're timestamps. Every scratch, every barnacle is a diary entry the ocean wrote backwards." Then she straightened and laughed, the kind of laugh you give when the joke's on physics itself. Next came the suitcase parade. Hard shells, soft shells, a purple one with a princess sticker half dissolved by salt. Each orbit tightened until the ellipse looked like a pupil contracting in bright light. The program painted it crimson, a 20 nautical mile eye staring straight up at whoever was left watching. But one fragment refused to play along. It was tiny, bright yellow, the sort parents buy so kids can spot their bag on a carousel. Instead, it drifted in slow circles, never quite crossing the invisible boundary. The ellipse tugged at it. Currents hissed and coaxed, yet it kept orbiting like a moon that forgot which planet it belonged to. Mara's cursor hovered over the tag, Object 77 Bravo, recovered off the coast of Madagascar, June 3, 2016. Inside, they found a plastic dinosaur, a juice box still sealed, and a folded drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun that had no face. The dinosaur had lost its tail. The juice had fermented into something sour enough to make the lab smell like regret. I asked the obvious question, why won't it land? She clicked again, ran another cycle, same result. The suitcase drifted clockwise while everything else spiraled counter. It was as if the child who packed it had left a thumbprint on time itself. Outside the window, dawn bled violet across the harbor. A fishing boat sounded its horn, low and mournful, and for a moment the monitors flickered. When the picture returned, the yellow suitcase had moved, just a pixel, maybe two, closer to the edge. Mara whispered, "It's almost like it's waiting for permission." I felt the room tilt, or maybe I did, because the eighth handshake was still unanswered in my pocket, 30 milliseconds early, strong enough to wake the satellite. Something had been closer to the surface than physics allows. Something that might have been a signal, or a suitcase, or a small hand knocking from inside the dark. The model finished its run. The ellipse pulsed once, then went dark. All trajectories had collapsed except one. The yellow suitcase continued its lonely orbit, a stubborn moon refusing re-entry to a world that had already ended. Mara reached for the keyboard, hesitated, then pulled her hand back as if the keys were hot. "We can't force it," she said. "Some things get to choose." The monitors dimmed to standby. In the reflection, I saw my own pupils again, wide and black, and behind them a flicker? No, a movement, inside that yellow shell. Because if the suitcase is still circling, still refusing the pull of the past, then maybe the knock we heard wasn't from the inside of the plane at all. Maybe it's from the future, asking to be let in. The future, they say, is always knocking. Tonight, it sounds like a slow, wet heartbeat coming from the bottom of the world. Day 1 of 30. I open the console and watch the green waveform blink. Lub, dub, lub, dub. Every second, a fresh promise that the black boxes are still willing to talk. I lean in, close enough to fog the glass. "Talk to me, darling. Just one more story before you sleep." Day 4. The technicians brew bitter coffee that tastes like burnt wire. Someone jokes that the ocean is drinking the signal for breakfast. Nobody laughs back. The waveform's shoulders sag. The peaks shrink from proud mountains to embarrassed hills. I tap the screen as if scolding a fading pulse in a hospital ward. "Stay with me. Stay." Day 9. The weather joins the conspiracy. Waves slap the hull like slow applause. Salt crusts the antennas. The heartbeat stutters, catches, pushes on. Each missed beat is a skipped breath in the listening room. There, flat for 3 seconds, then a shaky resurrection. We exhale in chorus, a choir of borrowed time. Day 14. I record a private log I'll never upload. I confess I've started dreaming in that waveform. It writes itself across the inside of my eyelids, a luminous EKG spelling names I don't recognize. Somewhere between sleep and sonar, I hear a child counting backwards from 30. When I jolt awake, the counter on the screen says 16 days, 14 hours, 59 minutes. Close enough. Day 20. The commanding officer calls it the long silence. He pats the metal casing of the hydrophone array like it's a loyal dog that's gone deaf. "She still feels the ocean," he mutters. "She just can't hear it anymore." I nod, but my mind is downstairs in the rack room, where the heartbeat is now a timid whisper. I swear the fan spins slower in sympathy. Day 25. Someone brings a cake iced in emergency orange. We slice it without singing. The frosting reads, "Find use," in wobbly letters, but the vowels slide off the edges before we can taste them. Morbid dessert. We chew anyway. Sugar is sugar. The waveform dips again, and the slice in my mouth turns to chalk. Day 28. I catch myself bargaining with a machine. 10 more beats and I'll believe in something again. 5 more and I'll call my mother. 1 more and I'll forget the faces I saw floating in that suitcase reflection. The screen grants me 3, then 2, then a valley so wide it feels like forever. I close my eyes and count the silence instead. Day 29.9. Midnight crosses the dateline, and the world tilts. The heartbeat, once a war drum, is now the faintest scratch on velvet. Lub. Dub. The green line trembles, then lies down like a creature that has decided the hunt is over. The counter rolls to 0. 0.00. But the screen does not go dark. It stays lit, a pale square eye refusing to blink. The flat line glows steady, almost smug. I feel the room lean closer. Nobody breathes. Is this death or a new language? The machines hum their cold answer. The box is alive, simply choosing not to speak. And in that hush, I hear it. Not a ping, not a pulse, but the softest knock, 3 times, skin against metal, from somewhere far below. Or from whatever future we've been ignoring. The counter starts counting up from 0. I am staring at the same pale square, still glowing, still taunting. The counter has crept past 3 minutes past 0, and the soft knock has stopped. The room feels heavier, like the ocean itself is leaning on the ceiling tiles. Then the chief engineer clears his throat, a dry scrape that slices the silence. He says, "Fugro is deploying now." My pulse forgets its rhythm. We are going live. I slide headphones over my ears, and the feed opens with a hiss that tastes of static and salt. The hydrophones drop at 1 meter per second, a funeral march in slow motion. At first, I hear only the ship's winch, a distant mechanical heartbeat. Then that too fades, and I am left with the sound of nothing, stretched into a ribbon. The technician beside me whispers, 400 meters. His voice cracks like thin ice. The cyan waveform appears on the monitor, a perfect flat line drawn by a trembling cursor. Every 30 seconds, a white hash mark ticks across the screen, the ghost of where a 37.5 kilohertz chirp should bloom. It never does. The absence feels louder than any alarm. I find myself counting those marks, 1, 2, 3, each a small betrayal. At 1,000 meters, the pressure outside the microphone is 100 times that of the surface, enough to fold a human like paper. I picture the pinger somewhere below, a tiny titanium heart sealed against such violence, yet refusing to beat. The engineer adjusts the gain, and the speakers hiss louder, but the waveform stays dead. "Still descending," he mutters, more to the void than to us. I lean closer until my breath fogs the screen. The cursor crawls past 2,000, 2,500, 3,000. Each meter is a year of questions stacking on my shoulders. Somewhere in the dark, the fuselage waits, wings spread like a fallen bird, windows staring upward. Are they open? Are they closed? Are they even there? Minute 37, 4,000 meters. The towfish kisses the thermocline, and the audio shifts. The hiss tightens, almost musical. I swear I hear the metal housing groan, a low wail song of stress. The technician's pen hovers over the log, inkless. No anomalies, he writes, as if language could shame the silence. 48 minutes. The calculated crash site is directly beneath us now, a lumpy grid drawn by math and grief. The cursor stops descending. The captain has leveled the towfish to glide 10 meters above the seafloor. I hold my breath, and the room holds it with me. The hash marks keep marching, perfect soldiers of time. No chirp, no pulse, not even a stutter. The waveform glows serene, a digital lake without ripples. My watch ticks to 59 minutes. Someone in the back whimpers, a sound too small for this much darkness. The chief engineer reaches for the mute button, then pulls his hand back as if burned. "Let it run," he says, voice raw. 1 more minute. The cursor blinks once, twice, still flat, and then, just as the hour completes, the faintest pop, a bubble of static no louder than a fingernail tap. The waveform twitches, a hairline jag that vanishes as quickly as it came. Was it the pinger? A distant ship? A fault in the cable? The room erupts in overlapping questions, but the feed has already gone back to its perfect hush. The counter rolls over to 0 again, ready for another hour we may not have. I pull off the headphones. The silence outside them is worse. Somewhere below, the black water keeps its secret. Somewhere inside me, a new knock begins. Soft, patient, impossible to ignore. The feed is still live. The line is still flat, and I cannot look away. The line is still flat, and I cannot look away. The counter rolls past 0 again. Another hour gone. Another hour, nothing has changed. I'm still in the operations van, headphones dangling like a noose around my neck, the air conditioner humming a funeral hymn. Outside, the night ocean is a black slab that swallows every star. Inside, the silence is louder. The philosophical question arrives like a drunk at closing time. If the black box never speaks, does the silence itself become evidence? Sounds like the kind of thing professors argue over wine-stained journals. But here we are, betting lives on it. I motion to Leela, our forensic audio engineer, a woman who treats sound the way surgeons treat blood. She nods, plugs in a rack of processors, and cranks the gain on the hydrophone feed by 1,000-fold. The speakers hiss like boiling oil. We listen. Nothing. Then, the ship's own propeller, a low, steady thump we never notice until we search for something else. Beneath that, the distant, mournful songs of whales, stretching across miles of salt and darkness. One whale calls, another answers, the notes sliding downward like a sigh. I find myself counting heartbeats, wondering if one of them might be mine, or theirs. Midnight becomes 2, becomes 3. Lila's eyes are red but wide, pupils reflecting green waveforms. She isolates the frequency band where the pinger should have lived, 37.5 kilohertz, a number tattooed on all our brains. She applies another filter, then another. The hiss tightens, narrows, until it is almost a whisper. And still nothing. I pour coffee that tastes like burnt wire. Somewhere in the process, I start talking to the feed, bargaining, pleading. Just one chirp, I mutter. One tiny bleep and I'll let you sleep forever. The speakers answer with more whale song. They sound like mothers calling children who will never come home. Then Lila stiffens. She rewinds 10 seconds, 20. She loops a slice barely half a second long. Listen again, she says, voice low. I do. At first, still nothing. Then, 3 pulses. Not mechanical, not electronic. Softer, like pressure waves against the diaphragm of the ocean itself. They arrive in the exact rhythm of the ACARS handshake, the same heartbeat the plane sent to satellites before it vanished. 1, 2, 3. Silence. The room goes colder. I ask the question no one wants framed. Did the water remember? Could the crash have pressed its signature into the medium itself, the way a stylus carves vinyl? Or are we only hearing what we desperately need to hear? Leela overlays the pattern against archived ACARS logs. The timing is off by less than 1/10 of a second. Statistically, negligible. Emotionally, catastrophic. We run the loop again and again. Each time the pulses feel fainter, as if the ocean regrets having spoken. I find myself leaning closer, breath fogging the console, terrified the next play will erase them forever. The whale songs continue, indifferent, ancient. They have mourned ships before us. They will mourn after. A knock on the bulkhead, the shift change. Fresh eyes, fresh ears. But I can't hand this over. Not yet. I copy the segment to a secure drive, label it ocean_breath 0347, and slide it into my pocket like contraband. My pulse is syncing with those ghost pulses now. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the horizon begins to pale. Somewhere beneath us, the black box still lies in its iron coffin, sealed and silent. Yet the water may have taken the witness stand after all. The question is whether anyone will believe a testimony spoken by whales. I cue the next hour of recording. The counter resets to 0. I press record. And I swear, just before the feed settles back into its normal hush, I hear a 4th pulse, fainter than thought. It does not match the pattern. It waits, alone, unanswered. I freeze, finger hovering over stop. If I press it, I might lose the moment. If I don't, I might lose my mind. The line is live. The silence is listening. And now, so am I. I leave the 4th pulse unanswered, fingers still trembling over the stop key, when a different silence slips in. Lighter, almost polite. It is the hush of a banquet hall after the last toast has been given and the guests have gone home to their own grief. The feed is still live, yet it carries no whale song now, only the low static of memory. I mute the volume, pull off the headset, and let the room breathe around me. Somewhere beyond these walls, families are orbiting the same absence, locked in yearly spirals that never quite decay. I have never attended the March Vigil in Kuala Lumpur, but I have listened to the recordings smuggled out by volunteers who place tiny microphones beneath the podium. Every year, the same ritual. 2,000 chairs, one for each soul, each tagged with a name written in fresh black ink that, over the course of the evening, fades to a soft, uniform gray. The organizers say it is only ultraviolet light and cheap felt pens. They still refuse to film the change, as though acknowledging the trick might make the loss any less real. The first time I heard the playback, I mistook the gentle scraping of ribbon against metal for rainfall. Then, the weeping started, and I understood the storm was inside the room. The counter I keep pinned to my desktop, days since last contact, ticks upward even while I sleep. Tonight it reads 1,840. I refresh the page, and it flips to 1,841, without hesitation. Machines have no talent for mercy. I open another tab and cue the montage the public affairs team released this afternoon. Slow dissolves of empty chairs, each labeled, each surrendering its color in the order the passengers checked in at the departure gate. The soundtrack is a single cello bowed so lightly the note barely forms, yet the hush between strokes feels louder than any chord. I let it play while I pace the narrow strip of carpet between my desk and the window. The carpet has worn to threads in a perfect circle, as if my own orbit is slowly grinding the world away. Halfway through the montage, the music stops for exactly 7 seconds. I check the time code, thinking the file is corrupted, but the silence is deliberate. When the cello returns, one chair remains in color, a tiny infant seat, safety belt buckled, its plastic tray reflecting the ballroom chandeliers like a pool of liquid starlight. No name tag is visible. The organizers insist they never planned this detail. They swear the ribbon slipped off during setup and was lost somewhere beneath the rows. Yet the live stream chat fills with viewers, claiming the chair was never labeled to begin with, that the absence of a name is the only honest signature left. I pause the clip, rewind, play it again. The red is impossibly vivid against the monochrome tide. My throat tightens as though some small, warm hand has reached through the screen and pressed a thumb to my pulse. I should shut the laptop, close the blinds, pretend the vigil is just another file. Instead, I open the encrypted folder labeled Orbitals. Inside are hundreds of voice memos from mothers, fathers, siblings, all recorded on cheap phones, all beginning with the same impossible phrase, "If you can hear me." I click one at random. A woman speaks Mandarin so softly it blends with the hum of my hard drive. She recites the lullaby she used to sing to her daughter, timing each line to match the tick of the day's counter. When the counter flips, she starts over. She has done this every night for 5 years. I listen for 3 cycles before I have to stop. The silence that follows feels heavier than any whale pulse I have ever captured. The cello fades again. The screen goes black, except for the single red chair. Somewhere in the code, a new variable appears, a single line of text that reads, "Awaiting identifier." I stare at the cursor blinking beside it, daring me to type the missing name, knowing that once I do, the color will drain away and the orbit will finally decay. But the keyboard remains untouched, the name unspoken, the grief unresolved. The counter flips once more, 1,842, and the line begins to scroll upward in real time, faster and faster, as though time itself is sprinting toward an edge I cannot see. I hover my finger over the spacebar, heart hammering like a sonar ping. If I press it, the story ends. If I don't, the red may burn forever. The silence is listening, and now, so am I. My finger still trembles above the spacebar, suspended like a diver caught between breath and abyss. The screen has gone black again. No red, no counter, just that void swallowing every pixel like it's hungry for more than light. I think of the 239 names I never dared to speak aloud, and the silence feels heavier than any ocean. Then, without warning, the black begins to thin. A sliver of silver creeps in from the bottom edge, widening, rippling, until the entire frame becomes the surface of the Indian Ocean at dawn. The water is gunmetal gray, shot through with molten copper where the sun leaks across the horizon. I hear it now. The waves, slow and patient, folding over themselves like pages turning in a book no one will finish. Somewhere beneath this skin of water lies the aluminum skeleton of a Boeing 777, its wings bent into prayer, its cockpit voice recorder a mute witness. I wait for the narrator in my head to say something profound, but all that surfaces is the same phrase we started with, only now it's soaked in salt. Good night, Malaysian 370. The words drift out of me, not as a transmission, but as a reply, as if the ocean itself is answering. The sound loops, softer each time, until it's just foam hissing against imaginary shorelines. I should feel closure. I should press the spacebar, let the credits roll, walk away. Instead, I sit here, counting heartbeats, wondering which one belongs to the child who pressed her face to the window at 35,000 feet and saw only stars. The horizon refuses to move. It bisects the frame with the indifference of a scalpel. Sky and sea each claim half, neither willing to confess where the secret is buried. Somewhere in my headphones, a distant ping echoes, sonar from Chapter 9 maybe, or just memory pretending to be evidence. Oh, I almost laugh at how he chased ghosts with mathematics, drew grids across the globe like a god playing tic-tac-toe. Every buoy we dropped was a wish, every algorithm a prayer, and still the Indian Ocean kept its mouth shut. The color begins to leach away, not into darkness, but into monochrome. Copper becomes pewter, rose becomes ash. I realize I've been holding my breath since the black screen first appeared. I exhale, and the frame trembles, as though my lungs are the only thing anchoring this moment to time. 239 pulses once echoed inside that metal tube. Now they echo inside me. The families from Chapter 11 orbit still, but their gravity is weakening. They're drifting outward, becoming constellations I can name, but never touch. The spacebar glows under my fingertip, a tiny emergency light in a cabin with no exits. I don't press it. I can't, because pressing it would mean accepting that the horizon is just geometry, that silence is merely absence. I want the ocean to blink first, to part its lips and spill one shard of truth, maybe a seatbelt buckle, maybe a child's drawing folded into a flight attendant's apron pocket. But the sea that doesn't forget is also the sea that never tells. It keeps its contracts in pressure and salt in the slow conversation between tectonic plates. I am the trespasser here, begging a witness that outlives every story. A gull cries somewhere far off, or maybe it's just static in the feed. The sound loops again. Good night, but now it's almost tender, like a lullaby tuned to the key of loss. Sleep now, sleep. The horizon remains a straight line, perfect and merciless, and then, without fanfare, the frame begins to narrow. The sky and sea inch inward, squeezing the boundary until it's nothing more than a hairline fracture between two eternities. I feel the story ending not with a crash, but with a whispered surrender. My hand slips from the keyboard. The spacebar dims. The last sound is not metal or mayday or even waves, but my own heartbeat sinking with the slow heave of the planet. Somewhere beneath this mirror of water, 239 souls are already part of the drift, carried on currents older than names. I am left on the surface, staring into the same void they vanished into, knowing the only honest ending is to let the silence have the final word. The horizon never blinks, the ocean never speaks, and yet, as the screen fades to black one last time, I swear I hear it, soft as breath, certain as tide, answering back. Good morning.